I love that, that Father Sam brought me in here. I do lead an organization, and absolutely, we engage in conversation and try to help people have more productive, reconciliatory conversation cross-culturally. The piece that be added onto that, the reason we do that is we desire to see the diversity of the body of Christ coming together in the community to transform communities. I always tell a story about how Threaded got started in some ways, where I got to go to the Vatican when I was several years ago. My mother-in-law, she likes to go on trips and she doesn't like to go alone. So she likes to pay for people to come with her. I'm happy to oblige. So we went to Italy, and she wanted to go to the Vatican. Anybody been to the Vatican before, in this place before? So if you've been to the Vatican, you'll understand the story. When you go into the Vatican, there's just so many rooms in there, right? You can be in there for 3 hours and not see everything. And we were in there, I think at the 2-hour mark, right? We were engaging in moving into some spaces. Now in the Vatican, the rooms that are there, they got rooms with paintings on the walls, rooms with paintings on the ceilings. They got rooms for what the outfits that the Pope wears. They got sculpture rooms, all that. And so about hour 2, we turn the corner. I'm looking down this long hallway that's marked with some of the most intricate pictures that I'd ever seen in my life. And I remember thinking, oh man, my feet hurt so bad. I'm just another painting room, right? And so I start to saunter into this room, and I start to look at the very first would-be painting on my left. And as I looked a little closer, I noticed that it didn't have what I expected. Instead of sort of brushstrokes, I saw small, colorful threads. And what I realized is I wasn't looking at a painting, I was looking at a tapestry. We were in a tapestry room. And I'll never forget, the question that came to my mind immediately when I saw this big piece of fabric woven together by thread, the question that came to my mind was, who created this? Like, who was the artist that was able to envision this beautiful picture and then take these disparate, colorful pieces of thread and weave them together in such a way as to create this image that was in their minds? Who was able to do that? And so for me in my life, and even the ministry that I lead at Threaded, we desire that those outside of the church have the same response when they see the church. That they'll see us in all of our diversity, right? All the different colors and cultures and races and denominations and political things, right? And they'll still see us coming together with unity to impact the community together. And that in seeing that, they would be inspired to ask the question, who is the God who threaded these people together? So the heartbeat of the ministry that I get to lead is, how do we glorify God with our unity and with our coming together cross-culturally? So I think part of that is why Father Sam has brought me in here today, because the question that you guys are engaging in is one in which our organization engages in quite a bit from a biblical and theological and missiological perspective. These concepts that we're engaging in on this question, they are not sans race, which is where I engage. In fact, we read that where you just read that prayer, talking about the races coming together. And so there's a ways in which we can engage that. Now, what I want to put out, because I do this a lot, and I do it in lots of different places. And what I want to recognize is, and I have to recognize it because I haven't recognized it in other places it's been a problem, is that I want to put the elephant to rest. Like, I want to reveal the elephant in the room to some extent, if I can. And it may not be in this room, but it's been in other rooms that I am, so I just always do it just to make sure. What I recognize is, as we start to talk about conversations where one of the terms in here is justice, and we get a guy who's coming in here, an African American with dreads, in a predominantly white space, really, that when we have these conversations, that there's people who are a little bit hesitant on this. They're like, what's this cat going to talk about? Is he going to shame people, right? And so you have people, as you see me, some people are like, oh, I can't wait to hear. This is good. I want to learn from him. Some people are kind of like, I'm waiting, see what he says, to whether I'm going to lean forward or I'm going to lean back. And then there's other people who are already leaning back. They're like, I'm not, like, whatever this cat says, I see how he looks, I see what his organization is, I can't believe any of it, and I don't know who's in the room. But if you are, I want you to know that I'm here for you, right? Like, that's fine. But I love God. Like, I am desperately trying to get the church in this conversation because it has been ripped from our fingers. And I believe that the Bible has all we need to engage these conversations of race and conversations of justice in ways that are going to be really fruitful, and ways that can be productive and create a space for the church to be relevant in the communities around us. justice if we engage it correctly. Another thing I want to give you pause on, if you're like, hey, is it going to make people feel shame? I grew up as a black man in a predominantly white environment from the time I was 3 years old. I'm constantly moving through white spaces, Hispanic spaces. I have engaged, I've got lots of friends who don't look like me, and I love them. There's one particular one that I love the most, and that is my wife. And she is a white woman. And I've got 2 biracial kids. So this engagement in this is, I've got skin in the game to want to see people actually come together. So I can't hate what I love, right? I love, and so we try to bring together everyone in the midst of this conversation. So that's kind of the elephant in the room. I just want you to know that that's there. You may not need it. You may be like, I can't believe he's telling me all this stuff. We're fine here. We're in Oak Cliff, bro, right? Like, whatever. But I just want to make sure, because there are those who need to understand that. Now take us to this question that I've been asked to engage. Like I said, I didn't grow up in the Episcopal Church, and so this common prayer, this Book of Common Prayer aspect and some of these things are kind of new to me. So I was skiing with my wife's family last week, and my mother-in-law still goes to the Episcopal Church that we were married in, and she's still very much a practicing Episcopal. And so I asked her. It's always hard to ask your mother-in-law to engage. She doesn't like to have conversations like this all the time. But I said, hey, I'm going to be doing this message next week at this Episcopal Church. I'm curious what you want to, like what you would say to this question. And so I asked her the question, will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? She said, and I said, so what does that mean to you? And she kind of hesitated for a little bit, and she's like, I don't know if I've ever really thought about that before. She said, and this, I don't know if this is true here, she goes, it can be in the Episcopal Church I've grown up in, there have been times where I'm just saying things because I always say them. And it becomes a rote thing. And I haven't really dug in on what this means. And so I don't know, but I need to give it some thought. I said, well, let's talk about it and see what you have. So some of what I want to do today is just kind of repeat the conversation that I had with my mother-in-law, right? And the assignment is to help us look at what does this mean, right? And then how do we do it practically? And I hope to do that with God's help, right? Right. So it's going to be interactive, right? There are going to be some questions, and then I'll take some things, and we'll kind of write up here a little bit. But first out of the gate, we have this question: will you strive for justice, peace among all people, and respect the dignity of every human being? This concept of the strive, we'll get to in a little bit, because I think that's where some of the practical comes. But I want to throw that word out there. That pesky little word at the very beginning that seems to create a lot of consternation in our society today. That J word, the justice word. And I'm curious from your perspective, when you hear the term justice, what are some things that come to your mind? Just as an exercise. What comes to your mind? Unequal and equality. Right. It's like the two things. Right and wrongs. Fairness. Social activism. Right. What else? What sort of words come to mind? What pictures do you get when the term justice comes out? What are some pictures in your mind pictures?
Scales.
You say scales? Yeah. What's that? Kindness. Fantastic. Great. Togetherness. Nice. Good. I love it. These are great articulations of justice. Where do we get our understanding of justice? Where do we get it?
The government.
Thank you. Just break it up, Colby. Just do it. Just bring it in immediately. I love it. That's in some ways society, though. They do get a definition of justice from government. Where else do people get definitions of justice? At home. Hear it from their families and sitting around the dinner table talking about it.
Church.
From the church. Fantastic. I love that. Where else?
Media. Sports and games.
Talk about that.
There's like rules and things like that, and they'll be like, well, it's not fair, so to make it fair, we're going to do. Got you.
So in a fairness aspect of where justice is, that we get it from even the sports that we play and some of the assigned ways we do things. Great. Good. Yeah, I hope, the answer of the church would be a great space in that we do get these concepts of justice from all these different places. And what I believe is that the church actually has a fantastic understanding of justice by the scriptures that we have in front of us. And so what I want to do, just to kind of get us started in the conversation of justice, and it'll lead us, I think, very linearly, if you will, through some of this question that we have, is I want us to just kind of think about justice through the book of Amos. Anybody familiar with the book of Amos? Minor prophet, page 3,485 in your book. No, just no idea where Amos is. But Amos is this really great book because Amos and the movement of Amos actually unpacks, I think, the ways in which biblical justice actually plays out. And I think it's important, if we're going to strive for justice, we want it to be attached to the God of justice and how he engages with it. So if you got Amos, you can take a look. I'll unpack some of this for you, and then I'll read some passages to help us go. So Amos is this minor prophet, right? And so what happens is, if you remember, Israel and Judah, Israel split into two kingdoms, Israel at the north and then Judah at the south. At this particular time, Israel had this king named Jeroboam II. And he was a king that had built up this great military power and all this wealth. But he was a really terrible king. And the environment and the society was really terrible because all these people had all this wealth, all this money, and all this power, but they were using it in unjust ways. They were selling the poor into slavery, and then they were denying them legal representation. So you got Amos, who's down in Judah, and he's upset with this, and so he makes his way up into Israel to confront and to do his prophet thing in the nation, in the kingdom of Israel. And so Amos is this collection, the book of Amos is this collection of his speeches and his poems and his prophecy. And what we find is that as Amos is unpacking this, at the very beginning, Amos starts to accuse the nations that are surrounding Israel of injustice. And as he does that, he starts in almost a concentric circle where he works out, and then the next chapter he works in, and finally he finds himself centered in on Israel. And when he gets to Israel and he's articulating the injustices that they're doing, God is upset with his crew because they should know better. Right? The Israelites were given this wonderful responsibility by God. They are supposed to be the messengers of Yahweh into the world, but they're also supposed to be the models of what a kingdom looks like under the leadership of Yahweh himself. And so God is upset because they should know better. They're selling people into slavery. This was a group that was brought out of slavery years and years ago by God himself, and here they are doing the same thing to others. And so there's this use of power and this oppression of the poor that God is not happy with, to the point where God even accuses them of this religious hypocrisy. In this time, there were people who were very devout. They were going to church. They showed up on Wednesday nights, right? They had Bibles in front of them, right? They were signing up for service, right? They had worship services 3 times during the week of Easter, right? They had all the things. They were very religious, right? And here's what God said in Amos 5. He said, I despise your feasts, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. This is 5:21 if you want to follow along. I'm in 22 now. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I will not even look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I'm a worship leader, so I do hear a lot of noise occasionally. I'm like, thank you, Jesus. Take away the noise. Thank you. I will take away the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps, I will not listen. These are churchgoers. These are people who anybody outside would be like, look at how awesome they are. They go to church all the time. Man, they must really love Jesus. God was like, I don't want to hear nothing from y'all. He was done. Why? Because they were misrepresenting the name of Yahweh in the world, which is the opposite of what they were given the responsibility to do. And so, in the midst of this, God says this. The next verse, in verse 24 in Amos 5, he says, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Anybody ever heard that that before? Yeah, it's one of those coffee cup, verses. I mean, it's a weird coffee cup verse. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you better give me my frappuccino. Let justice roll down. Be with you, right? So what I want to do is kind of give you a picture, if you will, because this word justice is actually connected with this word righteousness. And that is very common, particularly in the Old Testament. You're going to see when you find this word justice, you're going to find this word righteousness. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write a few things. I am terrible at writing in front of people. I get nervous at spelling. So if you don't like it, don't say anything. Don't say anything, right? And I'm going to, let's see, I think that's right. So you have justice and righteousness. Righteousness is tzedakah, and justice is mishpat, which I'll go up there, right up there later. Not because you needed to know Hebrew, but I like to sound smart, so I'm using Hebrew words. Righteousness. So what righteousness is, it's the right standing of society. Right relationships in society. Everybody's doing what they need to do in their right relationship with God, right relationship with themselves, right relationship with others, right relationship with the rest of creation. It's a plumb line. I think about it as a plumb line. Anybody ever build shelves and put up a retaining wall, right? I've never done any of those, but I've seen people do it, and they use a plumb line, right? So it's a plumb line. It makes sure all the standard is that everything is straight. And so you've got a society that's supposed to be working in righteousness. This is what Israel's supposed to be doing. But here's what happens. Along the way, as the society is going, something happens. An injustice occurs. Selling people into slavery, denying them representation. All of a sudden, what was righteousness has now started to spiral into unrighteousness. Right? So now you've got this unrighteousness. Everything's out of sort. So how do you create a society that's righteous again? How do you correct this space? Justice. Justice is a correction for society, for relationships into righteousness, back to righteousness. So what are the types of justice? I'm just curious. I'm going to tell you in a little bit, but I'm curious, do people think about that? Are there different types of justice? If so, how would you describe them?
Punitive.
Punitive? Yes. I put it in, let's see. I do retributive just because I'm a pastor and I like R's. And the next one needs an R. So punitive is right.
Restore.
Thank you very much. I love.
Let's stay with reconciliation.
Thanks. It's only really two. Reconciliation works in the midst of this, right? So, no, it works. It does come together. It absolutely does. It does come. It's just not necessarily right here. So you got those, right? You said punitive. What does that mean? What does retributive and punitive mean? Punishment, right? And usually there are a couple of folks that are characters, and there are a couple of folks that are kind of involved when there's an injustice. There's a victim and victimizers, I think that's spelled right, and then the community. So there's a punishment. Now, retributive justice is very important. Why would it be important to punish injustice in a society? To discourage it. Right, exactly. To punish injustice discourages the continuation of injustice by the victimizer. Right, if the victimizer never gets punished, then they just keep doing it, and they keep causing injustice, and society continues to spawn into more unrighteousness. So it's important that the victimizer knows, hey, this is not what we do here. Right? It's also important for the community to know this is not what we do here, so that they don't follow in and go, oh, I'm going to just do this too, right? So it discourages continual injustices like that. It's also important for the victim, right, to see that these types of injustices get dealt with, so that they know that they're safe. If it happens again, the person who does it or the people or whatever happens, that they will be punished. So you have this way in which retributive punishment is very important for I'll get to this in a minute, but sort of the way that the society is going to feel about the society that they're in. It's important. So now we think about restorative. Restorative, how would you describe restorative?
To put back the way it should be.
To put back the way it should be, to make things right. Right. Why is that important in a society to see restoration? Sir?
Because punishing the victimizer doesn't help the victim's hurt. So
Right.
something needs to be done for that.
Yeah. There's an injustice that's been done, something's been taken, something's been done to this person, and they're at a loss. Their relationship with themselves and maybe their society has been broken. And so there's a restoration that needs to happen, and it's not just a restoration by the victimizer, but in a biblical context, the Bible, all but I think 3 books are written to communities. And in fact, the way Amos was dealing with Israel, it was in a collective way. He wasn't calling out specific people in the community. He wasn't calling out Jeroboam II. He was calling out the community that I don't like your feasts. The community's feast. I don't want to listen to your music. It was a collective, which is hard for us in our American context to understand. We are the most individualistic country in the world. And so for us, as we read the Bible, it's easy for us to think, oh, but it's not about community, it's about me, and I didn't do anything in this space. And so the community, though, becomes a part of not only the retributive aspect and the support of it, but the restoration becomes a community restoration as well. And it's important, like you said, sir, that the victim is restored. But here's the thing that's also needs to happen. The victimizer must also be restored, because this person has also broken relationship with God's righteousness and with the victim and with the community. And so there's a restoration that everybody needs to experience. And so justice is part of that restoration and what it looks like to really be retributive but also restorative in the ways that it works, right? And so when we think about what our question is, will you strive for justice? I want us to just see that this is part of how this works. Now, what's interesting about Amos, the whole book actually articulates all of this. You see that Amos comes and he says that God says, let justice roll down like a mighty river in a stream and righteousness, right? And so what he does is there's a retributive aspect. He tells them, hey, you're going to get conquered by some army is going to come and they're going to conquer you. 40 years after he gives that prophecy, the Assyrians comes and takes them away. At the very end of the passage, after all this stuff God has been saying about retributive stuff to them, about justice, he gives them in the last 6 verses, he gives them these phrases in which he tells them, but there will be something new that's coming that will restore you back into relationship with me. And it's a call out to the Messiah who would be coming later. Jesus, the ultimate restorer, right? Jesus actually had to experience the justice, the retributive nature of justice for us. But then in his resurrection, as we will celebrate soon, there's a restoration, not only of himself, but a restoration of society altogether. So Amos really walks us through this conversation around justice. Now, here's the thing. So we've got this strive for justice. If you have a society that is living righteously and practicing justice, then one of the things you get to experience is peace. Will you strive for justice and peace among all, not just some people, all people? Now, peace is, how would you describe peace? Give me some terms for her descriptions. What's that?
Calmness.
Calmness. Yeah.
Absence of conflict.
Look, you just read your dictionary, bro. That's exactly. No, I'm just complimenting you. You know what I'm saying? Like you came right out with it, like verbatim. That's what it says next to it. It has your face, right? And it's like absence of conflict. There, you're with it. Do it. Absence of conflict. Any other spaces? Any other ways we look at peace?
Without fear.
Without fear. Cooperation. I love getting along. Now, what's great is, so if you remember, the church, like, will you strive for justice and peace among all people? Remember that Jesus called us, the people of God, to be what? Peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. So you've got peace, and I'll do this, makers. Now, the problem with peace sometimes, though, is sometimes peace is not just about making peace. It's about, people would say, peacekeeping. I'll do this. Sometimes people are peacekeepers. I said keeping there. Or they're peace fakers. Because one of the things we know is that just because, anybody married in here? Raise your hand. Come on, raise them high, you know. You know if you're married or if you've been in a relationship with anybody, but definitely in a marriage, like just because nobody's raising, Cain about stuff, it doesn't mean that everything's okay. Sometimes there's something stirring underneath that just ain't been dealt with yet, and you are on your way to non-peace. Right? And so that's where something changes. There has to be people who recognize that, and instead of, that's peace faking, and sometimes you do peacekeeping. I'm a big fan of like the Hunger Games. Anybody a fan of the Hunger Games in here? So they've got these districts, these 13 districts, and there's one district that's got all the money and all the wealth, and they send these peacekeepers to the other districts to keep them from rising up. See, violence can be peacekeeping, and peace can look like everything's good, but there's something stirring underneath. Dr. King made a differentiation between negative peace and positive peace. Negative peace is when everything looks like it's going well, but underneath something's stirring. Positive peace is when you break open release some of the chaos out, some of the hurt, so that as he would say, the oxygen can get to that wound, that infected wound. Because people, if you look at some of the ways in which we've seen our society erupt socially, just in these huge eruptions, people say, well, they're pulling gasoline on a fire. These people are coming in, they're making trouble pouring gasoline. And I go, I'm not concerned about the gasoline. I'm concerned about the fire. If you pour gasoline right here on this floor, nothing's going to happen. But if you got a flame, now we got a problem. So what we have to do as we strive for peace and justice is we have to go, what does the flame look like? How do we get rid of the flames so that when the eruption comes, and people like to throw gasoline, there's nothing for it to burn. So you got peacemakers, so the people who are of God are supposed to be active. This is an activity of making peace, which means you have to go and seek out and find out what's really going on under the surface. You've got to ask questions. You've got to go, particularly to those people who have been victims in the midst of the space, and go, has restoration been really done? And start to engage in that, and then we can work to make peace. And here's the deal. When you do that, you actually get to a better, and go back to the Hebrew word, a better version of society, which is the godly version of society going through, which is shalom. When I think about shalom, shalom is also the absence of conflict, but in a way, what it also means is that it recognizes that there's a potential for conflict, that the people in society have the capacity for conflict, but because it practiced this righteousness and justice, that they know when that arises that their society is going to handle it correctly. So my wife and I, we don't always get along, and she lives with a crazy person, right? Like I mess up all the time. I do things wrong all the time. And so she lives with someone who she knows at some point is going to hurt her feelings. She knows it. And yet, in our embrace, there's a shalom because she knows that even though I may do the wrong thing at times, I will make it right with her. And so she can have comfort in knowing that will be taken care of. And that's what shalom is that you're in a community and you know that it's not going to go quite right, but you know that it can be made right. It's a society in which God is moving us towards and wants us to experience. So we want to strive for these things, this justice and this peace among all people. And as we do that, we have to then move to the respect and dignity of every human being. What does dignity mean to you all? We'll get to the respect piece in a minute, but dignity. Give me some stuff.
Self-worth.
The dictionary? Oh, self-worth? Come on, let's. Come on.
Dignity would be self-approval.
Self-approval. It's not in the dictionary that I was looking at, but it's a good answer. Look, you are 1 out of 2 right now. That's better than. I'm impressed, bro. Go with it. Did you have something you jumped up? Nope, you good? Okay. Self-worth. There you go. He's like, that's all I got. Don't ask me for nothing else. Self-worth. Honor.
kind of what he's saying.
I'm scared of what he's saying. But you know, they do it under the breath. Under the breath is usually not something they want everybody to hear. So it's like,
It was a smart ass comment.
that's what I'm saying. I know.
I said it was a very
From
big
one
comment.
smart ass to the other, I know what an under the breath means. I know what that looks like. So the way I look at it, there's obviously several different definitions and do it, but I think in the ways that we're talking about in society is the ways in which we kind of talked about at the beginning. We talked about equality, equity, that status, that human being status is honored. Right? This is one of the big pieces. In fact, let me flip this and I'll write it down. What's happening in Amos and what's happening in Israel is they're not honoring the image of God in these human beings. So, and I say it like this, I think about it like this. If you go to, if there's a kingdom, go to a kingdom back in the day, I don't know, we don't think about kingdoms here in America too much, but go back in the kingdom and you've got a king and they've got their face on a banner throughout the city. They got statues of themselves throughout the city. They've got buildings with their names on it. And the king goes away for a while, comes back, and when he comes back, the city's in shambles. And the things that have been attacked, the banner has been sliced. The statues, his head's been cut off and destroyed. Spray paint over his name. What does the king know? The king knows that he has an enemy because that enemy is attacking his image. So who carries the image of God in society? All of us. So that's where dignity becomes, we should all be treated as if we are actually part of God's creation as image bearers. But this is what happens. So you've got God up here, and I know he's everywhere, but just for the sake of a diagram. And you've got this kind of equality that is about the image, I'm sorry people on my back, I'll move in a second, is the image of God. You are image bearers. Image bearers. Image bearers. And we all have an equal status in the ways in which we engage with God. But along the way, we humans decide other things. We start making categories that articulate humanity in different capacities. There are those who are, I'll call them humans, right? There are those who are called humans. But then there's another level after that. There are people who they are human-ish. Human-ish. Close. Then you got some folks sometimes who are humanoids. They represent humans. Then you got people who are non-human, and I think that speaks for itself, non-human. You got those people who are, I don't know if this is even the right word, inhuman. These are the criminals. These people, they messing up stuff. And so we create a hierarchical value system of humanity. Anybody read Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste? Thank you.
I couldn't bear it. I had to stop reading.
So you didn't finish it.
It was so depressing.
I know, this is what striving for justice and peace and all people, you got to go through the hard stuff. I know it's hard. I know, it's hard. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
Right? Because we have a society that has been running in unrighteousness in so many ways and has not practiced justice. And so we have all these stories that we have to endure that we never talk about. And so we just keep going in the wrong direction. But Isabel Wilkerson has in her book Caste, and there's the movie. Did anybody see the movie? Anybody non-readers? Origin came out in January. See, you can watch the movie. You don't even have to see the whole thing. But what she talks about is she unpacks a study that she did on caste systems. She looked at 3 specific places. She looked at India, which we know as that terminology of caste system, right? They've got the untouchables in the space. Then she looked at Germany, Nazi Germany, and looked at the ways the Nazis engaged with the Jews, right? And then America, right, which has a hierarchical racial caste system, which is around the world, but America really, practiced it very proficiently. And so in the midst of all of that, she noticed that, again, there's these hierarchical values of human beings, and there's ways in which, if you're talking about respecting the dignity, that people talk about humans in ways that are not dignified. Here's a couple of ways. Anybody been to the Human Rights Museum in downtown Dallas? Right? Have you seen, you remember that room where you come in and stuff's hanging from the walls and they're telling you where all the genocides happened in the world? And they're unpacking the different things that happened during a genocide that lead to a genocide? Anybody seen that? So here's a couple of things. I'll take it in. I think that there's a point at which we have to learn to recognize the signs of and I'm not going to call it genocide, that's a bit dramatic, but recognize the signs of where society is starting to not actually deal with image bearers well. And dehumanization is a big thing. And I think that for us right now, if I can put it into a current example, the ways we think about those who are not American, those who come from other places, immigrants, refugees. There are terminology that is being thrown out about these folks that is describing them in ways that is telling us, saying that these folks are somehow a different version of what is happening here. And it's very attuned to what we saw in Nazi Germany. Hitler frequently used terms to strip Jews of their humanity, likening them to vermin or diseases. Similarly, some contemporary discourse around immigration in America might use terms that dehumanize immigrants, suggesting that they are an invasion, an infestation. They are not human. That's dehumanization. It's one of the major things, tells that a society is moving in the wrong direction. So this idea of looking at this infestation, in fact, we in this Dallas area, I live up in McKinney, so I'm close to Allen. You remember in 2019, the shooting in El Paso, right? So the guy who was radicalized in Allen, and one of the things he said in that moment in his manifesto is that he was protecting America against the invasion of these foreign immigrants. You see, and that terminology is being thrown around on our media all the time, and he grabbed onto it and now acted upon it in ways that brought violence in a kind of genocidal act on a particular group of people that had been turned into non-human. It's important for the church to hear this. It's important. It's one of the great places that I think the church can really play its role in society, is that you have an identity that is beyond these other identities that people are going to tell you have. I know that we got this political election that's coming up, and so you got Democrats, you got Republicans, and some people in the church actually fight for those identities more than they fight for an identity of God. And that's what's making it very difficult for us to move forward. The church has given up our superpower that we can, with our connection to God and the God of justice, that we can actually help hold accountable those who maybe be outside of the church, and maybe they're a part of our party, but we can hold each other accountable, even inside of our party, for the language that we use about people. And I know that that's not sexy, and I know it's hard, because if I say something about it, then all my friends in my identity group are going to not love me. But you're in a good identity group. You're in one that's actually your primary one that you'll have forever. You can change. You can go to the primaries and you can say, I'm a Democrat this week, and next year I'm a Republican. You can change that all the time. When you come and you become a child of God, that's an unchangeable spot. You are now a part of something bigger that goes, and we are ambassadors here who are, much like the Israelites, supposed to be telling people what an actual kingdom looks like. God's kingdom. And so when you hear people around you, and you hear people who are leading you at your job, at the city level, at the federal level, the president level, if you hear people start to use language that says certain people are not human, but they're animals, you need to do something about it. You need to say something about it. You need to use your vote to say something about it. You need to be a part of saying what's wrong. This dehumanization is a huge part of not striving for the respect and dignity of every human being. So dehumanization is one of those things. Scapegoating is another. Fear-mongering, generalization, right? Putting out generalizations about people. This othering language, us versus them. Church, we have to be prudent and listen. I'm going to say wake up, and I know what that means. This dude's woke. No, just wake up and listen to the language around us. The devil is working hard and needs to be pressed against by those who have the power of God and know the difference. So when you have these spaces where injustice plays, usually the folks that engage this and have to and feel the brunt of this and become undignified or lose their dignity. I'm at 7:15. I'm right over. I'm feeling you. I feel it. Those folks usually are those who are powerless and marginalized. It's not the people in power that experience indignity. It's the people, because the people in power, they create this, and they get to call this them, and everybody else gets to experience this. Now, I want to engage this because I'm going to use this right here. The people in this space, I'll use the bottom tier, they need to feel from the church what they got demonstrated by Jesus. When Jesus incarnated into the world, he was living up in his golden gated community. He looks down at the hood, earth, and he had a choice. He could stay up there or he could do something about this marginalized people who had been disconnected in broken relationship through sin. And he came, and when he came to earth, he could have been a king, an emperor, but he chose to be a part of the most marginalized group in society, the Jewish community. And inside that community, he took on the role as the most marginalized inside the Jewish community. He was born of a teen pregnancy, had to run from his homeland as a refugee, live in Egypt as an immigrant. When he returned, the heat was up so much that he had to go to Nazareth, which, as you remember, Nazareth was the place that nothing good ever came out of. Think of whatever city you want that people are like, I'd say Detroit, where people are like, Detroit? Does anybody good come out of Detroit? If you're from Detroit, I'm sorry. I just know this is how people talk about Detroit. I don't believe it. They do it. These are the folks that Jesus hung with for 30 years. He surrounded himself with the people considered humanoids, non-humans, the marginalized of the marginalized. He was trained by them. He played stickball with them. If Jesus played stickball, I don't know what games they played. You know what I mean? They just kind of kicked the sandal around. I don't know, right? But he played games with them. He was taught by them. He learned skills with them. He went over to their house and got sugar from them. Like, these were his friends. Which made sense, because then when he appears in Luke 4:18, and he comes and he says, I came to bring good news to the poor, sight to the blind. I came to set at liberty those who are captives. Jesus wasn't talking about this in existential ways, like I came to give poor in spirit, although that's part of it. But he's thinking about actual poor people who he grew up with. He came and he embedded himself in the most marginalized parts of our society. And you know why he did that? It's because the marginalized always saw these people getting everything. And if you say, who does God love the most? He would say, the people in power God loves them the most because they get everything. And so Jesus was like, no, I'm coming to you so that you know that the God above is about everybody. And I want to make sure that you never doubt that Jesus loves everyone, even those considered the lowest piece of the caste system. And then he said in there that the phrase where he said, hey, the poor will always be with us. You know that phrase when he says that? People were like, oh, that means that we can be kind of apathetic about poor and maybe we'll handle poverty if we need to. No. The reason the poor are always with us is because they are actually to guide us to Jesus. They are to remind us of Jesus. Matthew 25, sheep and the goats, remember that? Where they divide up and some people are going to the left, and some people are going to the right. And to those on, I think it's the right, I might have it backwards. Going to the right, he says, when you fed the hungry, when you gave water to the thirsty, when you visit those in prison, when you did this for the least of them, but you did it for me. And those who didn't do it, he said, you didn't do it for me, so now go into gnashing and hell, basically. Jesus identified himself so deeply with the marginalized that he created some sort of way in which our salvation is revealed by it. I'm not saying that that's about your salvation, but there's something salvific going on there that shows whether we actually know Jesus. Because when you feed the poor and you engage them, you must know Jesus because you're engaging him in the poor. So the poor are here to draw us, those who are rich like myself, to draw us into a relationship with them, because to go and seek them is to seek Jesus. The Pope Francis said it like this in his book, Go Forth. He said, when you go, I'm not going to read it here, because I'm getting long in my speech here. Maybe I'll find it. Anyway, he said, when you go to lend aid to the poor, you go to give aid to your Lord. See, for us, we separate, and maybe we engage the poor in transactional ways. I'm going to go to the poor and I'm going to give them something. Or I'm going to go to the poor and I'm going to ask them this question, what do you need? In this question of what do you need, there's a kind of power that's there. I have everything, what do you need? You have nothing. Whatever you need, I can supply it. The question needs to be flipped. It's not what do you need, it's what do you have? What are your assets? What do you do well? What are your passions? How do you follow God? Because if Jesus lives in this space, then our approach to those in the midst of this conversation who do not experience the dignity, if he lives here, then our job is to go there not to be conquerors, but to be curious, to find out what we can learn about Jesus from these who, what I say, read the Bible from below, as opposed to the way I read it, which is from above, because I've lived in such a privileged society. So when we look at this striving for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being, this striving has to start with, there's 4 ways that we strive. One is you have to recognize that you don't know everything about this situation. And so you have to be ripe. You have to be ready. R-I-P-E. I'm going to just write it down here and I'll finish up with this. R is you got to reorient yourself around this conversation of justice and righteousness and peace and dignity. You've got to read the history. You've got to know it. I know it's hard to do it. You've got to push through and learn the history of what's going on, particularly in our context. Other contexts have their own thing, but understand the context that you're in. Because from there, once you understand it, you should be moved because of what you experience, what you see, to go and to identify and build relationships with others. To understand other cultures and to see what God is doing in those cultures because you know that you can learn from them, or to go to the poor because you know you can learn from them. I want to identify with them. I want to build relationships with them. Not just transact, not just drop off a backpack or drop off food, but to be in relationship, and in a relationship with people in which they are your equal. Where you have relationships that are refrigerator right relationships. Y'all know about refrigerator rights? People come to your house and they can just get in your house, get in your refrigerator anytime they want. That's the friendships that we need to create, because those are equitable friendships. Once these friendships have been established, now you can come together and you can plan action of how to engage the marginalized community and the needs of the marginalized community. But now you have the perspective of everyone at the table. In the race conversation, I try to work with this when I build coalitions, is I want a multicultural coalition of folks, but I also want people from the city and people who've been working in the work, that we're all in the room together, but we're using everyone's perspective, and we've got relationships that work to build equity in the relationship, and we plan action, and then you execute that plan together and evaluate how it's going. If you jump into action to go, okay, Marcus, I love this, to strive, I'm gonna just go do something, you're not ready. Read, learn, understand what justice means in your community. What does it look like to be about mishpat, restoration, and then engage the people, not to give them things, but to learn from them. It's an exchange. And then you can plan together what you need to do to move forward. That's what striving means in the context of this. Will you strive for justice and peace among all people, and respect the dignity of every human being? And everybody said,
I will, because God said.
Well, may God give you the strength to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Sorry, it's late. I took a moment.
There was a lot there. We're at 1:25, but maybe if there's 1 or 2 questions that folks are like, or comments that folks are clamoring to engage Marcus with. Otherwise.
I'll be here. If you got questions.
I've got one.
Yeah, go for it. The book is called Cast, and it's...
I'll try again.
I'm sorry. What's your question? Go for
Listen,
it.
I adore Isabel Wilkerson.
I know,
and
right?
to all the Bible study people, I've been beating the drum about the warmth of other suns.
Yes,
I
yes.
think every American should read that
That's
book.
great.
But Cass just depressed.
It does. It's hard.
Yeah,
It's a tough
it
one.
really is. What is the I in your?
Identify. Yeah. So I ran through that. Reorient, identify, plan, execute. Ripe.
So how much of the process, I guess if you will, is recognizing like the sins of our own community within the context? I mean, like that was a major point of Amos, where it was like,
Yes.
you know, darn Judah, and everyone's like, boo. Like, oh, no way, I was like, boo. And he's like,
And you, Israel, is like,
yeah. So, I mean, like, how much of the point is not necessarily like finding where injustice is, but like seeing it within like our own families or ourselves or whatever?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the one of the wonderful things about being a Christian, I would imagine, is we are constantly called to evaluate our own methods and motives, right? To look for sin inside of us. It's how we, in some ways, prepare ourselves to meet with God in prayer, even, or even in what's the passage like, before you come and lay your offering at the table. If a brother you know has something against you, not if you got something, if somebody you know has something against you, go and make that right. There's almost this connection of like, you almost, and look, I don't want to make dramatic, but I'm just looking at that passage, and there's some way in which you are denied full connection with God when you haven't figured out the injustice in your community. So you got to engage it. So absolutely. Yeah. And in yourself too. Yes, for sure.
Well, thank you, Marcus, once again.
Sure. Thank
Let me close us with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you.
you. And also with you. I love it.
Pray. Gracious Father, thank you once again for gathering us together this evening. Thank you for our brother Marcus and your spirit that you've placed in him, and for this word that you brought through him this evening. We pray, oh God, that you would make our hearts ever more eager and attentive to and responsive to the call that you give us to strive for justice and peace among all people and to respect the dignity of every human being. Give us a fuller and deeper sense of what that means. Give us the willingness and ability to reflect on our own ways in which we have not done that. As we prayed at the beginning, God, we pray that you would bring us all in your good time to worship you in harmony, all nations and races around your holy throne. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.